Yeah, so this is about the Nirrigin Brook in the southeast of west of Perth region. But before I get started, I just want to recognise that I'm presenting from Whadjuk Noongar Budja and pay my respects to elders past and present. So this project, as I said, we're about 25 kilometres to the southeast of Perth for this site. It formerly was a drain. It still serves an important drainage function for the city of Armidale, so it has a large urban catchment upstream, but it is through the site where we were working, it was a rural drain to all intents and purposes. So the journey that we went on started back in 2006 with the Wollongong Urban Water Redevelopment Scheme and Master Plan. There are actually two Nirrigin Brooks. So there's Nirrigin Brook North, Nirrigin Brook South. I'm going to talk today about Nirrigin Brook North mostly. But there's a couple of points where I'll talk a little bit about what happened at Nirrigin Brook South, because they went, or part of Nirrigin Brook South went a little bit earlier than Nirrigin Brook North, and the living stream journey that they went on started to sort of inform our response to the two similar requirements. The first sort of go at redesigning that drain, that rural drain, happened in 2007. The Water Corporation undertook a capacity review and developed a concept in recognition that the site was going to transition from being rural to being urban, looking at modifying the channel to something that was predominantly in their instance, looking at something that would be safer as a part of a community multiple use corridor, something that would not be a danger to the community if they wanted to approach it, so that it wouldn't need to be behind a fence. As a part of the planning scheme, there was a review by the EPA, and a ministerial statement was developed to set the environmental conditions for the redevelopment scheme. And it was a strong driver towards improving water quality through the development process. So there was this operational water quality objective that was set for the whole scheme area. And it also required the preparation of water management reports aligned to stages of development. And that was the very beginnings of the Western Australian Better Urban Water Management process, which has since become business as usual. So the design philosophy that was established in the District Water Management Strategy that followed on from that was to create natural water courses with geomorphology and native vegetation typical of the local area. So that was a really strong statement of intent for the existing trapezoidal drains to be converted in the area. Corridor widths were set at that District Water Management Strategy stage, and for Nirrigin Brook North, for our site, that was a 70-metre corridor at that stage. The next step was then to look at the local structure planning for the area, and for us that involved the Haynes Cell C, so that's the particular part of the site, and the Nirrigin Brook is running along the northern edge of that structure plan area. And at that stage, the local water management strategy was also developed. Very similar cross-section, didn't really change the design intent at all, but there was a slight narrowing of the corridor through the structure plan area, down from 70 metres to 60 metres. And in 2012, this is when we really started to get moving on the site. So we were able to start our site investigations when Urban Quarter acquired the land and started their subdivision planning. And as you can see from these photos, that it was a rural drain at that time. There's the difference there between what it looks like in summer and winter. It's really dominated by grass, very little other types of vegetation, some trees on the site. But you can see that in some sections, through lack of maintenance, essentially, the
watercourse had started to re-establish a sort of semi-natural geomorphology, particularly in the base flow channel. So you can see some of those meanders starting to form, and some sections look more natural than others.
So in 2013, we had our first proper design workshop. We got all of the various approvals agencies involved at that stage to help us to identify appropriate design criteria for the site. And this process was really the first proper look at the cross-section and the first sort of significant modifications to the cross-section that had been conceived at that early district water management strategy stage, and even before that with the early water corporation work. To do that, we had a look at what had already happened in Nirrajin Brook South, and this was the state that Nirrajin Brook South was in at that stage. Some modification had occurred. It had been created very much along the lines of those early cross-sections, with a very broad, flat profile, very wide corridor, with intermittent control structures designed to slow down the flow and make sure that whilst there would be deep water, it would be moving very slowly and therefore would achieve safety criteria across the full width of the site. So for our site, we had a look at those safety criteria and tried to really challenge that approach. And what we focused on was the fact that, you know, a velocity and depth type criteria isn't really appropriate for a living watercourse. We wanted to make sure that we came up with a more natural profile. So what we ended up with, and through that workshopping process, we're able to get all of the agencies on board with it, was this understanding that whilst you've got a fairly deep, fast-flowing section in the middle of the channel, in order to get to that part, you've got to make your way through at least 5 or 10 metres of very slow, safe flow before you even get there. And the density of the vegetation that was proposed would mean that that was really not likely for people to try and do. We were managed to get those cross-sections approved, those modelled cross-sections approved through the Urban Water Management Plan process, but it did take us just a little bit over a year. When we got our final approved modelled cross-section, that's still quite early days in the process, where we can see this is that early cross-section. So this was what was approved via an Urban Water Management Plan. And the major components of that: base flow channel, stream channel, vegetated floodway, and a floodplain area broader right out into the rest of the multiple use corridor, with vegetated biofilters for the local drainage connections overflowing into the channel. Because of the modelling process, the base flow channel and the stream flow channel were essentially combined and left to resolve the detail through the detailed design process following on from this. So following on from that approval of the Urban Water Management Plan, the basic cross-section, then we started to look in more detail at refining those details. And the vegetated overland flow path was a major component of that. We wanted to shift away from static biofilters overtopping into the living stream to avoid amenity issues that we knew would be likely in this particular area. It's very flat, slow flowing water anyway. So we shifted from a biofilter approach to a vegetated overland flow path and made the flow path as long as possible. So we got the length of the flow path was maximised by actually pulling the water sort of, in some instances, against the flow in the main channel to get that length of flow path before it was discharged into the main living stream. The vegetated overland flow paths, you can see on the bottom image here, you can see where those locations are and how those flow paths have been lengthened as much as we possibly could. The base flow channel was another component that we wanted to change, and we wanted to address the detail of that base flow and the difference between the base flow and the stream flow channel. From those early site investigations, we knew that there had been very little maintenance, that the geomorphology had started to re-establish into a semi-natural form. There were meanderings present that we wanted to make sure that we were going to retain as much as possible. So that design process was a really important thing for us to enter into. And the third part that really we needed to focus on post that basic approval was to look at the land and management arrangements. So prior to the development, the corridor was entirely Water Corporation owned land with the private rural land to either side. And there was a complex and lengthy series of land exchanges to allow the construction to occur, land transfers backwards and forwards between the developer and the Water Corporation, to eventually end up with a situation where the Water Corporation still own that central channel, but there is local government vested land on either side, which forms the floodplain. So the floodway, the major flows generally stay within the Water Corporation's landholding, but the floods are unable to extend out into local government land. But in terms of management, the local government looks after the whole site, with the Water Corporation only getting involved when and if they absolutely feel it's necessary, and we haven't had a scenario like that so far. So construction and establishment then started to occur in 2016. The first piece of construction was to provide for a road crossing, and you can see that in the distance. You can see the culverts there, just at the end of this section of the drain. But the guidance then to the earthworks contractors was pull back the banks, reform that channel, but don't touch the bottom half metre of the channel. So that bottom half metre where that naturalised geomorphology was present, we didn't want our earthworks contractors, our civil contractors, we didn't want them to go anywhere near that section. So this is how they progressed. They pulled back the banks, made it all, provided the upper floodplain areas, protected the trees, but left those that base flow channel well alone. And then following on from that, 2016, 2017, the landscaping started to occur, and you can see that first photo on the left there is the first phase of planting, and then you've got the later once they've started to establish. And here's a few more photographs showing how that initial landscaping progressed, and that was completed in 2017, and then a few years later handed over to the City of Armidale for the local government to look after. And you can see that even by this stage the planting had really started to establish very well, and of course they were pretty comfortable with it all when it was handed over in this kind of state. It looks really nice. It's not just a living stream. We've got other things going on in the site. So on the left-hand side there, you can see one of the overland flow paths bending away and running parallel with the living stream for a way before eventually it turns back into the living stream. And then we've also got vegetated median swales that run in the larger roads within the development. And then the multiple use corridor itself also includes breakout areas with playgrounds and shelters and picnic benches and things like that, so that it can provide those multiple functions that we're expecting out of a developed multiple use corridor, so that the community gets to spend time there. These are the very latest pictures back in 2023. We're still going really nicely. We've got great vegetation growth. The maintenance by the local government over the last 5 years really has focused on making sure that they maintain sightlines so that it's safe.
they maintain footpaths and make sure that it's all fully accessible for the community to use the spaces. Just to recap on what it's looked like over that 10-year period, so 2013 when we first started on site, right through to 2023, and you can see the changes there are quite dramatic with the site. Again, there's a few views here showing comparisons between different stages of the progress at the same location, so you can start to see how it's changed. This little bridge was used by the original farm owner to get from one side of his paddock to the other, and the developer decided to retain that as a footbridge so that we could allow for the community to traverse the stream without having to go on the road or on the footpaths next to the road. So it gives them a really nice footpath across the stream. And this is one of those overland flow path connections from the road. So the runoff from the road is able to enter the living stream here. In 2019, you can see the vegetation starting to grow. 2023, it's really doing well, and you can see there where the water would just duck underneath the footpath and make its way into the living stream behind. I just wanted to also give you a bit of an overview of how we think the success was achieved and the real keys that were used to get there. The early planning, so the fact that it was that the overarching objective for these living streams in this development area was established right back in 2006 and was carried right the way through from those early design objectives was really critical. A willing and engaged landowner was fabulous. The developer was very patient, and the project team was engaged and involved and excited to be doing something a bit different. We did have a fair bit of flexibility from our approvals agencies to allow us to look at different approaches, look at different ways of achieving criteria, particularly in relation to water quality, switching from the biofilters to the overland flow paths, which hadn't really been tested in WA at that stage. And the role that Aqua was able to play through that was as a design champion. So to carry that shared vision all the way through the process was really important. There were times where the civil designers were kind of taking the lead. There were times where the landscape designers were taking the lead. And then, of course, with the contractors, the planners and the developer getting involved in relation to land ownership and management responsibilities. But having us able to be involved right the way through the process to really nurture that shared vision and make sure that what we achieved, I think, is really consistent with that early vision of natural watercourses, the geomorphology and native vegetation typical of the local area. So that was really at the heart of it. Just moving on what we would do differently, if we would do anything differently, mostly I think no. Hopefully I think we'd get there a bit faster if we did it again. The journey was really important, and I think we got a lot of lessons out of it, both for us and for approvals agencies and also for various contractors that were involved, but was definitely frustrating for the developer, and I really would be surprised if they would be up for it again. But really their hesitancy would be mostly about timeframes, and if we could do it a bit faster, then I think they'd potentially be on board again, because you can see the value of it when you go on site. The big sticking points and the things that took time to get resolved were safety criteria fairly early on, but we had an issue and were able to do that right at the beginning. Vegetation in the base flow channel was a thing that the Water Corporation remained quite resistant to vegetation in base flow channels within their drainage systems. But we never really officially got approval for that. We just kind of let it happen once the landscaping commenced. Similarly, land tenure was something that we just weren't aware of. That we didn't really think about the fact that the land tenure and the management arrangements when we started would be quite so critical and take quite such a long time to resolve. So I think probably my major lesson would be to start those discussions about who's going to own the land, who's going to manage the land, and how that's going to be arranged, and the process that we'll go through to establish that is started as early as possible. And that's pretty much me finished. The picture, I think, hopefully speaks for itself. I feel like it's been a really successful project, and we're very proud of it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Helen.